The Sopwith Camel emerged at a crucial point in the First World War, when aerial combat was shifting from improvised encounters between lightly armed machines to organized dogfights between purpose-built fighters. By 1916, the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service faced a pressing need for an aircraft that could outmaneuver the increasingly sophisticated German designs such as the Albatros D series. Earlier British machines, including the Sopwith Pup and Sopwith triplane, had shown promise, but each had limitations in firepower or survivability. The Camel was conceived as a direct response to these deficiencies, designed to combine agility, concentrated armament, and a rugged airframe suited to the demands of frontline service. The aircraft was the work of Sopwith Aviation Company under the leadership of Thomas Sopwith, with chief designer Herbert Smith taking the lead role in translating operational requirements into a practical machine. Their goal was to produce a fighter that could capitalize on the rotary engine's torque, to deliver exceptional maneuverability while standardizing weaponry to match or exceed German firepower. The design process emphasized compactness, structural simplicity, and improved pilot protection. The result was a small, single-seat biplane with a relatively short fuselage and wings of equal span, giving it a distinctive silhouette. One of the Camel's defining features was its armament. Whereas many earlier British fighters relied on a single synchronized gun, the Camel carried two 303 Vickers machine guns mounted directly in front of the cockpit, synchronized to fire through the propeller arc. This doubled the available firepower and gave pilots a decisive advantage in combat, enabling concentrated bursts that could bring down enemy aircraft more reliably. The placement of the guns also improved accuracy, as the weapons were closely aligned with the pilot's line of sight. The power plant chosen was the Clerget 9B rotary engine, later supplemented by Bentley BR.1 and Lerone engines in different production runs. Rotary engines were notorious for their unique handling characteristics. The entire engine rotated with the propeller, producing massive gyroscopic forces that made the aircraft difficult for inexperienced pilots to control. In the Camel, this trait was deliberately harnessed. The torque effect made the aircraft especially agile in right-hand turns, though it also made left turns sluggish and landing hazardous. This duality, extreme maneuverability combined with challenging handling, became central to the Camel's reputation. The cockpit was set far back behind the engine, with the guns and fuel tank concentrated forward. This arrangement gave the Camel its name, a pronounced hump in the forward fuselage that enclosed the breeches of the Vickers guns. The layout placed most of the aircraft's weight within a short distance of the center of gravity, making it quick to respond to control inputs. At the same time, it demanded constant attention from the pilot, as instability was the trade-off for maneuverability. Pilots who mastered the aircraft found it deadly, those who could not face significant risks even outside combat. By the time the first prototype flew in late 1916, the Camel already represented a clear evolution from the Sopwith Pup. It was heavier, more powerful, and more heavily armed, yet retained the small size and agility of its predecessor. The challenge was to refine the balance between controllability and combat effectiveness, ensuring that the Camel could survive not just in trials but in the unforgiving conditions of the Western Front. The stage was set for the prototype and testing phase, where the Camel would demonstrate whether it could become the war-winning fighter its designers intended. The prototype Sopwith Camel made its first flight in December 1916, and from the outset it demonstrated both the potential and the dangers of its radical design. Test pilots reported that the aircraft was extraordinarily maneuverable, capable of tight turns and rapid changes of direction that exceeded the performance of the Sopwith Pup. This was achieved by concentrating the mass of the engine, guns, fuel, and pilot within a short fuselage section, creating a compact center of gravity. Yet this same feature made the Camel notoriously unstable. Unlike its more forgiving predecessor, the Camel demanded constant control inputs, and small mistakes could easily lead to a stall or spin. During the early testing period, the Camel was fitted with the 110 horsepower Clerget 9Z rotary engine, but later models adopted the 130 horsepower Clerget 9B or the Bentley BR.1, which delivered improved performance. These engines gave the Camel a top speed of around 115 miles per hour, 185 kilometers per hour, and a service ceiling exceeding 19,000 feet, 5,800 meters, both respectable figures for the period. Climb rate was particularly strong, allowing the aircraft to reach combat altitudes quickly. The rotary engine's torque remained a defining feature. In right-hand turns, the Camel could roll and yaw with remarkable speed. But in other maneuvers, the same forces could become difficult to counteract. The aircraft's compact dimensions, an overall length of just over 18 feet and a wingspan of 28 feet, made it both agile and difficult to hit, but also cramped for pilots. The cockpit was Spartan, dominated by the twin Vickers guns and essential instruments, with little regard for comfort. Endurance was typically around 2.5 hours, sufficient for patrols over the Western Front, but limiting its use on longer missions. Engineers and test pilots agreed that the Camel was not designed for endurance or range, but for concentrated combat over relatively short distances. Flight trials also confirmed the value of the Camel's firepower. Twin synchronized Vickers guns gave it a decisive edge over opponents that still carried only a single gun. The placement of the weapons directly in front of the pilot allowed for precise aiming, and combined with the Camel's agility, this made it one of the deadliest fighters of its time. However, the firing system required careful synchronization and maintenance. Early trials exposed reliability issues with the synchronization gear, but these were gradually addressed, allowing the Camel to deliver consistent bursts without damaging its own propeller. Transitioning from prototype to production required adjustments to improve handling and operational reliability. The Sopwith Aviation Company refined control surfaces, strengthened the undercarriage, and introduced variations in engine types depending on availability. Production began in earnest in early 1917 with multiple contractors, including Bolton and Paul, Clayton and Shuttleworth, and Rust and Proctor, contributing to the large-scale output demanded by the war. The decentralized production ensured that thousands of Camels could be delivered to frontline squadrons within months. The testing phase also highlighted the steep learning curve for pilots. Training accidents were common, as inexperienced aviators struggled with the Camel's sensitivity. It became clear that while the aircraft was a powerful tool in the hands of a skilled pilot, it was unforgiving to novices. Flight schools adapted by gradually transitioning pilots from more stable trainers to the Camel, and specialized instruction emphasized its quirks. Despite the risks, the consensus among military leaders was that the Camel's combat advantages outweighed its difficulties. By mid-1917, the Camel was ready for operational deployment. It entered service at a time when Allied forces urgently needed an answer to German air superiority, and its arrival promised to alter the balance in the skies. The aircraft had proven itself in trials as a highly maneuverable, heavily armed machine, albeit one that required skill and discipline to operate effectively. The stage was set for its baptism of fire on the Western Front, where its reputation as the ace maker would soon be forged. The Sopwith Camel entered operational service in June 1917 with No. 4 Squadron of the Royal Naval Air Service, soon followed by units of the Royal Flying Corps. Its arrival coincided with one of the most challenging phases of the air war. German Albatross fighters had achieved a period of dominance, and Allied pilots were sustaining heavy losses. Expectations for the Camel were therefore high, and its first missions were watched closely by commanders eager for an aircraft capable of restoring parity in the skies. Initial deployments quickly revealed both the strengths and hazards of the new fighter. In combat, the Camel demonstrated extraordinary agility, capable of turning inside the tighter arcs of German aircraft and allowing skilled pilots to gain firing positions with remarkable speed. The twin Vickers guns gave it devastating firepower once an enemy was in the sights, and within weeks of its introduction, pilots reported multiple successes against Albatross D-3 and DV fighters. Squadrons equipped with Camels rapidly became more confident in dogfights as the aircraft's combination of maneuverability and concentrated firepower began to tilt engagements in their favor. At the same time, the Camel's unforgiving handling characteristics claimed many inexperienced pilots. Training squadrons had already warned of the dangers, and frontline experience confirmed the risks. Pilots who attempted to manhandle the Camel without mastering its torque and responsiveness often crashed during takeoff or landing. Commanders soon recognized that the aircraft demanded careful selection of pilots and rigorous training. But those who survived the initial learning curve found themselves in possession of one of the most effective fighters of the war. The Camel's operational role was not limited to air superiority. Its compact size and strong structure made it adaptable to ground attack missions. By late 1917, Camels were fitted with 4 25-pound Cooper bombs for low-level strafing and bombing raids against German trenches, supply depots, and artillery positions. These missions were extremely hazardous, exposing pilots to intense ground fire, but they demonstrated the versatility of the aircraft. In this role, the Camel became one of the earliest fighters to perform dual tasks as both air superiority and ground support aircraft, setting a precedent for multi-role fighters in later wars. Reactions from military leaders reflected a mixture of admiration and caution. The Camel was recognized as a transformative asset, credited with giving Allied squadrons the ability to regain control of contested skies. By early 1918, it had become one of the most numerous British fighters at the front, equipping more than 50 squadrons. Reports from squadron commanders emphasized its effectiveness in dogfights, particularly when flown in groups that could exploit its turning advantage collectively. At the same time, leaders acknowledged the high accident rate among new pilots, an unavoidable cost of harnessing such a demanding machine in wartime. The Camel's combat debut also revealed its psychological impact. German pilots quickly learned to respect and fear the new Sopwith fighter, recognizing its agility and firepower. Accounts from both sides of the front describe how the appearance of Camels often forced German units to disengage or fight defensively. This morale effect was as valuable as the aircraft's technical qualities, as it shifted the initiative back to Allied aviators. By the end of 1917, the Camel had firmly established itself as the backbone of British and Commonwealth fighter forces. Its operational deployment marked the point at which the Allies could challenge German air superiority with confidence. Though costly in training accidents and demanding for pilots, the Camel's effectiveness in combat more than justified its widespread adoption. It was no longer an untested prototype, but a frontline machine that had begun to shape the outcome of the aerial war over the Western Front. The Sopwith Camel's reputation as the ace maker was forged during its extensive combat service in 1917 and 1918, where it became one of the most feared and effective fighters of the war. Its primary role was air superiority, engaging German fighters in dogfights over the Western Front. The Camel's ability to turn inside its opponents gave Allied pilots a decisive edge, and its twin Vickers guns delivered lethal bursts at close range. In the hands of skilled pilots, the aircraft proved devastating, credited with more than 200 enemy aircraft destroyed, an unmatched record for any single type during the conflict. Pilots such as Major William Barker, Captain Roy Brown, and Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Collishaw became renowned for their successes flying Camels, embodying the aircraft's deadly potential. The Camel's reputation grew to such an extent that German aviators often identified it as their most dangerous opponent. Its maneuverability allowed it to exploit weaknesses in German formations, while its concentrated firepower could bring down even heavily built Albatros fighters. Dogfights often highlighted the Camel's quirks. Sharp right turns could disorient opponents, while quick climbs and dives kept enemies off balance. These qualities, however, demanded precise control. Many victories came only after pilots had learned to master the aircraft's inherent instability. Beyond fighter engagements, the Camel was adapted for ground attack and close support. With 4 25-pound Cooper bombs mounted beneath the fuselage, it flew low-level missions against trenches, supply depots, and troop concentrations. These sorties exposed pilots to concentrated machine gun and artillery fire, but the Camel's small size and agility allowed it to evade ground fire more effectively than larger aircraft. Such operations became increasingly common during the Allied offensives of 1918, when air power was integrated more systematically into battlefield strategy. The Camel thus became one of the first true multi-role fighters, performing both air superiority and ground support tasks with equal effect. Losses were inevitable, and the Camel's unforgiving nature continued to claim pilots even in combat. Its rotary engine, while granting agility, also made the aircraft difficult to handle in dives and high-speed maneuvers. Combat reports frequently mention fatal spins or accidents during dogfights, especially among inexperienced aviators. This duality, deadly to enemies but also hazardous to its own crews, defined much of the Camel's wartime story. Nonetheless, Allied commanders accepted the risks, recognizing that the aircraft's combat effectiveness outweighed its costs. The Camel also played a role in night fighting, a relatively new concept at the time. Modified versions were equipped with navigation lights and incendiary ammunition to engage German Zeppelins and Gotha bombers during raids on Britain. Although limited in success, these missions showed the adaptability of the Camel design and the willingness of engineers and pilots to experiment with new tactics. By 1918, night fighter Camels were among the first dedicated attempts to intercept and destroy enemy aircraft under cover of darkness, a role that would expand significantly in later wars. The tactical impact of the Camel was profound. By concentrating large numbers of these fighters in key sectors, the Royal Flying Corps and later the Royal Air Force were able to regain air superiority in areas that had been dominated by German units. The aircraft's presence altered the balance of power in the skies, forcing German designers to accelerate development of newer types such as the Fokker D7. Even then, the Camel remained competitive until the war's end, a testament to the soundness of its basic design. In combat, the Sopwith Camel was not merely another fighter, it was a decisive weapon that shaped aerial strategy in the final years of the First World War. Its success in dogfights, its adaptability to ground attack, and its pioneering use in night operations made it one of the most versatile and effective aircraft of the conflict. While it demanded much from its pilots and exacted a heavy toll in training and combat accidents, its contribution to Allied air superiority was unmatched. The Camel's combat record firmly established it as the most successful fighter of its era and ensured its place in the annals of military aviation history. The development of the Sopwith Camel did not stop with its original fighter configuration. As production accelerated and combat experience accumulated, a series of variants and modifications emerged, each tailored to specific operational requirements or designed to address shortcomings revealed in service. These adaptations extended the Camel's usefulness well beyond its role as a frontline dogfighter, demonstrating the versatility of its basic design. The standard production Camel was powered by rotary engines such as the Clerget 9B, the Larone 9J, and the Bentley BR-121. Variations in engine type were often dictated by availability, as wartime production placed immense strain on supply chains. The Bentley-powered version in particular earned a reputation for improved performance and reliability, offering better power-to-weight ratios and more robust handling at altitude. These incremental changes produced noticeable differences between squadrons depending on the engines fitted, though all shared the same essential strengths and challenges. One significant variant was the Sopwith 2F.1 Camel, developed specifically for the Royal Naval Air Service. It featured structural modifications for operations from naval vessels, including detachable fuselage sections for easier storage and folding arrangements for deployment on aircraft carriers and ships. The 2F-1 also commonly carried one Vickers gun and one Lewis gun mounted on the upper wing, a configuration that expanded its firing arc against high-flying airships. Naval Camels were employed in defense of the British Isles against Zeppelin raids and were among the first fighters launched from carrier decks, marking an important step in the evolution of naval aviation. Another field of adaptation was ground attack operations. Recognizing the Camel's agility at low altitudes, engineers modified some airframes to carry bomb racks for up to 4 25-pound Cooper bombs. These aircraft were used extensively in 1918 during Allied offensives, flying dangerous missions at treetop height to strafe trenches and drop bombs on supply columns and artillery positions. Though highly vulnerable to ground fire, the ground attack Camels contributed to the combined arms tactics that were beginning to take shape in modern warfare. Training variants were also introduced, as the Camel's unforgiving flight characteristics made it unsuitable for inexperienced pilots without specialized preparation. Dual-control versions were built with a second cockpit for instructors, allowing safer instruction in handling the aircraft's quirks. Even so, accident rates remained high, reflecting the fundamental challenge of taming a machine that demanded constant vigilance. The Camel also underwent experimental development for night fighting. Some aircraft were fitted with navigation lights, modified exhaust systems to reduce glare, and special ammunition for engaging bombers and airships at night. These adaptations produced the first operational night fighter squadrons in British service, though their success was limited by the primitive state of contemporary navigation and detection technologies. Nonetheless, the Camel's use in this role laid groundwork for future night fighter doctrine. Internationally, the Camel was exported in limited numbers, with examples delivered to Allied nations including Belgium and the United States. American squadrons flying with the British Expeditionary Force received Camels before U.S.-built aircraft became available, giving American pilots exposure to one of the most advanced fighters of the war. Post-war, surplus camels were sold or transferred abroad, appearing in smaller air forces and occasionally in civil use as training or exhibition machines. The sheer scale of production ensured that variants were plentiful. More than 5,400 camels were built by multiple contractors, making it one of the most numerous British fighters of the conflict. Each variant added a layer of versatility, demonstrating that the design could be adapted for air defense, naval use, ground attack, training, and night operations. While it remained demanding to fly, its adaptability kept it relevant until the very end of the war. In sum, the Sopwith Camel was not a static design, but a platform that evolved in response to battlefield needs. Its many variants reflected both ingenuity and necessity, as engineers and commanders sought to exploit every possible advantage in the air war. This evolution ensured that the Camel retained its place at the forefront of Allied aviation, adapting to roles far beyond its original conception as a short-range fighter. The Sopwith Camel's wartime career ended with the Armistice of November 1918, but its legacy extended far beyond the battlefield. It became one of the most iconic aircraft of the First World War, remembered as much for its influence on aviation history as for its immediate impact on the war. Its combination of heavy armament, agility, and adaptability ensured that it shaped both the outcome of the air war and the future trajectory of fighter design. In terms of global impact, the Camel's record was extraordinary. Credited with destroying more than 1,100 enemy aircraft, it achieved more aerial victories than any other Allied fighter of the conflict. This statistic alone cemented its reputation as the quintessential ace-maker, producing some of the most famous Allied pilots of the war. The Camel's effectiveness also forced Germany to accelerate the development of new designs, such as the Fokker D7, in an effort to counter its dominance. In this way, the Camel contributed directly to the technological arms race that defined the latter stages of the First World War. The aircraft's influence was not limited to combat results. By demonstrating the value of concentrated firepower, the Camel set a standard for future fighter designs. The twin synchronized machine guns became the norm, and later aircraft expanded upon this concept with ever greater armament. The Camel also highlighted the importance of maneuverability over sheer speed in certain tactical contexts, influencing how designers balanced performance characteristics in subsequent generations of fighters. After the war, surviving Camels were distributed across the world. The United States, Belgium, Greece, Canada, and other nations operated small numbers of Camels, either as combat aircraft in late stages of the war or as surplus acquisitions afterward. In America, the Camel played a role in training and familiarization for pilots, giving them experience with a frontline European fighter. For smaller air forces, the arrival of surplus Camels provided access to advanced technology they could not have developed independently. The aircraft's symbolic importance ensured that it became a centerpiece of post-war commemoration. Camels appeared in victory parades, exhibitions, and air shows, where they represented both the achievements of Allied aviation and the sacrifices of those who flew them. Museums across Britain and the Commonwealth preserved examples of the aircraft, and replicas were later constructed to illustrate its role in the Great War. Its distinctive profile, with the humped fuselage concealing twin guns, became instantly recognizable as a symbol of early aerial combat. Culturally, the Camel remained embedded in public memory. It was immortalized not only in military histories, but also in popular culture, where it often represented the archetypal biplane fighter of the First World War. Even decades later, references to the Camel could evoke the image of open cockpit dogfights, rotary engines, and the daring exploits of wartime pilots. This cultural resonance outlived the aircraft itself, making the Camel a permanent fixture in the mythology of aviation. From a doctrinal standpoint, the lessons learned from the Camel influenced interwar fighter development. Designers increasingly recognized the importance of matching high performance with manageable handling characteristics, seeking to avoid the steep learning curve that had cost so many novice Camel pilots their lives. Stability, pilot ergonomics, and survivability became greater priorities, even as agility and firepower remained essential. In this way, the Camel served as both a model and a warning for subsequent generations of fighters. By the time of the Second World War, the Camel was long obsolete, yet it was remembered with respect as the aircraft that had once ruled the skies. Its surviving examples, preserved in museums or displayed in memorials, stand as tangible reminders of how far aviation advanced in just 2 decades. The leap from the Camel to monoplane fighters such as the Spitfire or Hurricane was enormous, yet the lineage of ideas, emphasis on maneuverability, concentration of firepower, and adaptability to multiple roles can be traced back to the Camel. Ultimately, the Sopwith Camel's legacy lies not only in its wartime service, but in its enduring influence on aviation history. It epitomized the maturing of fighter design during the First World War, established doctrines that guided interwar development, and became one of the most iconic aircraft ever built. Its record of victories, its unforgiving character, and its symbolic power combined to make it a legend, ensuring that the Camel remains remembered as the ace-maker of the Great War. Beyond its widely recognized combat record and iconic status, the Sopwith Camel also carried with it a collection of lesser-known episodes, experimental adaptations, and post-war stories that illustrate how the aircraft continued to shape aviation in ways that are often overlooked. These unseen chapters help round out its history, showing that the Camel's influence extended into areas of research, training, and even symbolic experimentation long after its frontline career had ended. One such chapter was the aircraft's use in early trials of aircraft carrier operations. The Royal Navy, already experimenting with flight decks during the war, saw the Camel as a suitable test platform due to its compact dimensions and strong structure. Naval Camels became among the first aircraft to take off from and land on moving ships, including HMS Furious. These pioneering efforts laid the groundwork for carrier-based aviation, foreshadowing the central role aircraft carriers would play in the Second World War. While overshadowed by its role as a fighter, the Camel's contribution to naval aviation was a vital but often underappreciated milestone. Another relatively forgotten role of the Camel was in home defense. A number of Camels were stationed in Britain to counter German Zeppelin and Gotha bomber raids. Some were modified with special ammunition, including incendiary and explosive rounds, to increase effectiveness against airships. Night fighter variants featured navigation lights and altered exhaust systems to reduce glare. Although interceptions were difficult with the limited technology of the time, these missions demonstrated the adaptability of the Camel and its value in defending British cities, even if its successes were modest compared to its daylight record at the front. After the war, surplus Camels found their way into unusual contexts. Some were used for experimental research, including engine tests and aerodynamic studies, as designers sought to apply lessons from the war to new generations of aircraft. Others entered civil aviation, serving as racing aircraft or appearing in air shows, where their reputation and distinctive appearance drew crowds. A few were even sold into private hands, marking an early example of surplus military aircraft being used recreationally. Cultural representations also played a part in the Camel's post-war history. In literature and popular media, the aircraft was often portrayed as the quintessential British fighter of the Great War. Its distinctive silhouette, with the pronounced hump over its twin guns, became shorthand for the era of open-cockpit dogfighting. Even in children's books and post-war propaganda, the Camel symbolized courage and technological innovation. Its reputation persisted well beyond its operational life, reinforcing its place as a cultural as well as a military icon. Technically, the Camel also contributed to training programs after the armistice. Dual control trainers based on the Camel were employed to prepare new pilots, even as newer aircraft replaced it on the front lines. These training variants allowed instructors to demonstrate the aircraft's unique handling characteristics safely, passing on valuable knowledge of rotary engine fighters before aviation moved decisively toward inline and radial engines. The training role was perhaps less glamorous than its combat service, but it extended the Camel's operational utility into the peacetime years. Finally, a symbolic legacy emerged in the way veterans and historians reflected on the aircraft. Pilots who survived the Camel's hazards often recalled it with a mixture of respect and caution, describing it as both a killer of enemies and an unforgiving machine for the inexperienced. These personal accounts highlight the paradox of the Camel. It was the most successful fighter of the war, yet it demanded more of its pilots than almost any other aircraft. This duality, Acemaker and Widowmaker, became part of its lasting story. Thus, the unseen chapters of the Sopwith Camel reveal its broader influence. It was not only a frontline fighter, but also a test platform for naval aviation, a tool in home defense, a vehicle for experimentation, and a cultural symbol. Its story did not end in 1918 but continued through training, research, and commemoration, ensuring that the Camel's contribution to aviation history was far richer and more varied than its dogfighting reputation alone might suggest. By the post-war years, the Sopwith Camel had already secured its place in aviation history, yet its story did not simply fade into the background with the arrival of newer designs. Instead, it transitioned into a role as both a symbol and a teaching tool, shaping how aviation was remembered and how future generations of pilots and engineers approached the rapidly advancing field. Its final chapter is therefore not defined by combat, but by legacy, preservation, and influence. One of the Camel's most enduring contributions was its role in bridging the gap between the fragile biplanes of the First World War and the more sophisticated monoplanes that emerged in the interwar period. The lessons it embodied on concentration of firepower, the dangers of instability, and the value of adaptability remained guiding principles. Designers in the 1920s and 1930s often referenced the Camel as a benchmark for maneuverability and combat effectiveness, even as they sought to eliminate the traits that made it so difficult to fly. Its successes and its shortcomings both informed the evolution of fighter doctrine. In terms of cultural legacy, the Camel was firmly established as the most iconic British fighter of the Great War. Its silhouette appeared in countless books, films, and illustrations, standing in for the era of open-cockpit dogfighting. Veterans' memoirs frequently recalled the Camel's quirks, and its reputation as an unforgiving but deadly machine became central to the mythology of air combat. Popular culture even elevated it to a symbol of wartime aviation more broadly, overshadowing other important aircraft of the conflict. For the general public, the Camel became the face of early aerial warfare. Preservation efforts ensured that the aircraft remained visible long after production ceased. Museums in Britain, Canada, the United States, and other nations preserved surviving examples or constructed replicas. At the Royal Air Force Museum in Hendon, the Imperial War Museum, and other institutions, the Camel has been displayed as a centerpiece of early aviation history. Airworthy reproductions have also been flown at air shows, providing modern audiences with a tangible connection to the era of wooden frames, fabric coverings, and roaring rotary engines. These displays reinforce the Camel's role as both a historical artifact and a living reminder of early air combat. Internationally, the Camel's impact was remembered in varied ways. In the United States, where American pilots flew Camels alongside British allies before homegrown aircraft were available, the type became a formative experience for aviators of the fledgling U.S. Air Service. In Belgium and other smaller Allied nations, surplus Camels served as early cornerstones of post-war air forces, influencing local aviation traditions. In this sense, the Camel's reach extended well beyond Britain, shaping global perceptions of fighter aviation during and after the war. Its symbolic status was further reinforced by the narratives constructed around its most famous pilots. The victories achieved by men like William Barker, Roy Brown, and Raymond Collishaw ensured that the Camel's identity as an ace-maker was never forgotten. These individuals became part of the national memory of the war, and their association with the Camel meant that the aircraft itself was celebrated as the tool that enabled their achievements. Over time, the Camel became inseparable from the broader story of Allied air superiority in the final stages of the conflict. Ultimately, the Sopwith Camel's final legacy lies in its dual identity. On one hand, it was a technical machine with defined strengths and weaknesses, a product of the design challenges of 1917. On the other, it became a cultural symbol, an icon of courage, innovation, and the maturation of aerial warfare. While it would soon be replaced by newer designs, its name remains synonymous with First World War air combat, ensuring its place in history. The Camel may have been difficult to master and dangerous to fly, but its influence on aviation, its role in securing Allied victories, and its lasting presence in public memory secured it a reputation as the definitive fighter of its age. The final perspective on the Sopwith Camel is one of transition, from a war machine forged in the crucible of 1917 to a historical symbol studied, remembered, and honored long after its practical use had ended. Its combat record made it the most successful Allied fighter of the First World War. Yet the Camel's importance cannot be measured by numbers alone. It reshaped how fighters were designed, how air combat was fought, and how aviation was perceived by the public. After 1918, the aircraft lingered in service briefly with the newly formed Royal Air Force, but it was clear that aviation had already entered a new phase. Inline and radial engines with greater power began to replace the old rotary engines, and airframes grew stronger, faster, and more stable. In this new environment, the Camel was a relic of a bygone era, brilliant in its time but rapidly overtaken by new technology. By the early 1920s, it had been retired from most frontline roles, its duties confined to training, exhibitions, and occasional use in smaller air arms. Yet as it disappeared from the skies, the Camel took on a new life in memory and culture. It became a fixture in commemorations of the Great War, often displayed in parades, memorials, and air shows. Surviving airframes were preserved in museums, where they became touchstones for visitors seeking to understand the first generation of air combat. The aircraft was not remembered as a technical curiosity, but as a symbol of Allied determination and the sacrifices of those who flew it. Its distinctive hump and compact form became iconic, easily recognizable even to those with little knowledge of aviation history. The Camel's story was also carried forward by veterans, whose recollections helped shape its reputation. Pilots described it as deadly to the enemy but unforgiving to its own, an aircraft that rewarded skill and punished error. This dual legacy contributed to its mystique. It was the machine that produced more aces than any other, yet it demanded a toll in accidents and training losses. In post-war writings, this paradox was often highlighted as evidence of both the courage of those who flew it and the rapid pace of technological evolution during the war. In broader historical terms, the Camel marked a turning point in the understanding of what a fighter should be. It confirmed the principle of concentrated forward-firing guns, emphasized the value of agility over raw speed, and demonstrated the potential for multi-role flexibility in fighters. These lessons influenced interwar and even Second World War designs, proving that the Camel's contribution did not end with its retirement. Even in popular culture, the Camel maintained a presence. It became a recurring figure in stories, films, and illustrations of the First World War, often serving as the archetype of the biplane fighter. Its name, unusual and distinctive, ensured that it was remembered alongside other legendary aircraft like the Fokker Dr. I and the Spad 13. For the general public, the Sopwith Camel became shorthand for the entire era of fabric-covered biplanes and open-cockpit dogfights. Thus, the Camel's final chapter is less about its physical existence than about its symbolic endurance. From a technical standpoint, it was a stepping stone, bridging the gap between early aviation and the modern fighter. From a cultural standpoint, it became immortal, representing the bravery, innovation, and sacrifice of a generation. The Sopwith Camel may have flown for only a brief window in history, but its influence reached far into the future, ensuring its place as the ace-maker of the Great War and one of the most significant aircraft of the 20th century. By the conclusion of its story, the Sopwith Camel stood not only as a machine of war, but as a defining symbol of the evolution of air combat. Its record of victories, unmatched by any other Allied fighter of the First World War, placed it at the forefront of aviation history. Yet its true significance lay in the way it embodied the lessons of the early air war. The importance of concentrated firepower, the tactical advantage of maneuverability, and the risks of designing machines that pushed the limits of pilot skill. The Camel's legacy was inseparable from the pilots who flew it. It produced more aces than any other aircraft of the conflict, yet it also claimed the lives of many inexperienced aviators, its instability making it a stern teacher in the art of combat flying. This paradox became central to its reputation. To some, it was the deadliest and most effective fighter of its era. To others, it was a merciless machine that punished mistakes as harshly as any enemy. In both respects, it represented the unforgiving realities of aviation in its infancy. Technologically, the Camel marked the culmination of the rotary engine fighter. It demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of that configuration, paving the way for the shift toward inline and radial engines in the post-war years. The aircraft proved that twin synchronized guns should be the standard for fighters, and it showed how agility could be decisive in combat even when speed was modest. These principles became part of the foundation for all subsequent fighter design, extending the Camel's influence far beyond its service life. In terms of global impact, the Camel helped establish Britain's reputation as a leader in aviation during the First World War. It ensured that the Royal Flying Corps and later the Royal Air Force could contest and ultimately gain air superiority over the Western Front. Its deployment in naval squadrons and its pioneering use in carrier operations expanded its reach, making it a contributor not only to the defense of Britain but also to the early development of naval aviation. Exports and post-war transfers extended its influence abroad, leaving traces in the histories of several smaller air forces. Culturally, the Camel became one of the enduring icons of the war, preserved examples in museums, replicas flown at air shows, and its frequent depiction in literature and film ensured that its image survived long after the last operational examples had vanished. For the public, it became synonymous with the age of open cockpit biplane duels, its distinctive profile instantly recognizable as the fighter of the Great War. Its name, simple and evocative, ensured that it remained in the collective memory even among those with little interest in aviation. Looking back, the Camel can be seen as both a peak and a transition. It represented the height of biplane fighter design at the time of its service, yet it also marked the end of an era. Within 2 decades, aircraft such as the Spitfire and Hurricane would demonstrate how far aviation had advanced, but they did so along a path that the Camel helped define. The lessons of its strengths and weaknesses carried forward, influencing not only interwar development but also the doctrines of the Second World War. In the final analysis, the Sopwith Camel was more than just a successful fighter. It was a machine that defined an era. It symbolized the rapid maturation of aerial warfare, the heroism and peril of early combat pilots, and the fusion of engineering innovation with battlefield necessity. Though it served for only a brief span, its impact was enduring, shaping the course of fighter aviation and securing its place as one of the most important aircraft in the history of military flight.